but rootkits are going to hide themselves from you, right? Let's just do that real quick. We talked about Trojan. A Trojan's where I wanted something useful, that VMware or Photoshop key generator. I went out there, I grabbed it, I downloaded it, and I was like, I'm a smart guy. I'm going to run it inside of a virtual machine. Except VMware has got vulnerabilities too. So if somebody is sophisticated, and I would do this for something like a VMware key generator or like a Splunk or ArcSight key generator, because anybody who's going to be interested in that probably runs networks. Those are people worth going after, right? So you get enterprise tools, you put the key generator out there, those guys grab it. I figure they're smart. And if you've got a VMware exploit, that's where they could use it. They run keygen.exe. They also are running VMware exploit.exe. It breaks out of the virtual machine, jumps into the host OS. Meanwhile, the admin's like, I'm a smart guy. I did a snapshot. I did a revert. Look, good as new. But in reality, if VMware's got problems, you've now got problems. The host OS had code actually execute on it. So that stuff's all possible. Again, kind of coming back, Trojans are where that comes from. I wanted something, I reached out, I grabbed the candy, it was tainted. When we look at backdoors, which is what we're kind of talking about here, a backdoor is simpler. You know, I didn't need to entice you to click on it, I'm already in your computer. But what am I going to add to your computer so that I can have continued access? It might be just a netcat shell. It may be a vulnerable application that I can break into in the future. But I'm going to add something to your computer. If you look at your file system, you can find it. If you look at netstat for your network connections, you'll see the data there. Especially if you're logging data in, data out, you're going to see it. If you look at processes, you use Process Explorer, you're actually going to see me sitting there. You're going to see the IP addresses it's connected to. It's not hidden. What is the opposite of that would be a rootkit. Rootkits are going to hide everything from you because they work at a higher level of the operating system, actually a lower level. They work at level 1 as a device driver, typically talking to the kernel. So you can't see a rootkit. You don't know that it's there. You run netstat, you run ls, you go through all your processes, but it lies to you every single time. What doesn't lie is the packets. So that's where I try to do rootkit discovery, or try to do malware discovery just by looking at network calls. If it's a busy server, real hard to look at all the network transactions. It's like a needle in a haystack trying to figure out what the anomalies are. But if I take that, let's say it's a virtual machine, and I can get a good backup of it and run it in a DMZ or an isolated environment, and then look at all the network calls, that's where I can discover things. So when we've got things like Keyloggers, especially a sophisticated one that's maybe part of a rootkit that's hidden, you're not supposed to discover it. You're not going to discover it, typically. So what do? You look for those network transactions. Everybody's got to get the data off the box. Unless you're using a physical keylogger, then they'll just come retrieve the hardware module. And let's see. Oh, Doug's talking about Cupcake Ninja. Okay, so Cupcake Ninja is a Raspberry Pi inside a cell phone power supply, which records Wi-Fi keystrokes onto flash. Still works as the power supply too. Pretty slick. I've been putting cameras in everything. They got little teeny tiny USB chargers with cameras in them and a micro SD adapter. So you plug like a 128 gig card in there. It has power because it's plugged into the wall. It has microphone. Newer ones are even going to have remote data exfil over cellular. So that's pretty neat. Crazy, crazy. So here's some keyloggers that are out there. They've got keyloggers for Mac too. I know you guys saw ads that said Apples don't have viruses. That was all fake news. Lots of malware for Mac as well. So when we look at spyware, this is a bit more sophisticated. This is going, I don't just want the keystrokes. I want other people's keystrokes. What are people saying to this particular user? Sure, maybe I want to know about processes, files, but typically, this is stuff that we're looking for, trying to discover communications. There's all different leagues of spyware. At one version, you've got your digital nannies for watching kids. Then there's spouse stuff. And this gets really weird with wiretap laws. Are you allowed to record what other people do? Talk to a lawyer. It varies by every state and every circumstance. So you've got things that could happen within family. And you're like, well, it's okay to spy on my kids because I got to keep them out of trouble. Should I be spying on my spouse? I don't know. Then it starts to get to things like employees. And we go, should we be auditing employees for productivity purposes? And again, this varies. This is where we got to pay attention to login banners. Do you have any expectation of privacy? And as it goes on, it goes on and on and on down the road. And some of this stuff, you've got friendly companies located here in America from brands that that go, this is how we're going to keep your kid out of trouble. On the far other end of the spectrum, does anybody remember the story of Hacking Team? That was actually their name. This was the firm out of Italy who was actually compromised. And what they were doing was they were selling very complex spyware for desktops and for mobile devices to very oppressive regimes. And those regimes were going after journalists. So you've got people that are investigating very, very heinous crimes, and then you had attackers who were basically arming them with exploitation software and then software that could go onto the phone, that could go onto the laptop to record everything. So on the far end of this, you've got, and again, this is like a commercial business giving zero-day software and nation-state level attacks and spyware to oppressive regimes that are going after journalists. So investigative journalists could be targeted. Starts off with just kind of looking at kids, then it goes down to journalists and whistleblowers. So definitely something everybody should be concerned about. How do you get infected with this stuff? It varies. Drive-by download is it when you visit a website and it serves you some type of malware. This could happen through ads. They call it malvertising. This could happen through the website being exploited. Somebody will attack the website, put on a special script. When you talk to that web server, you tell them who you are. You go, this is Safari on an iPhone. They go, we love Safari on iPhones. Here's an exploit for that. Other things, people that aren't patched, people that aren't careful, they get caught the most often. Everybody gets caught sometimes, right? Not everybody's bulletproof at all times. Some people get caught more than others. Well, we could prey on them. The people that are constantly getting affected, when they do a search for how do I break whatever the latest kind of ransomware is, we go, here's a free tool to help you. They download the free tool, now they're twice as screwed as they were. So some of the anti-spyware, anti-malware apps are actually malicious. You've got browser exploits all the time, right? Firefox, Internet Explorer, Brave. A lot of times what I'll do with my web browser, and the OS I respect the most at this point is called Cubes. Cube starts you off with a little baby hypervisor. From that hypervisor, you've got template VMs. A template VM is a virtual machine that you basically do your operating system install to. You install applications, you apply security patches, you make it read-only to the rest of the world, and you shut it off. Then you create what's called app VMs, which leverage the operating system, and they just have a local directory that they write to. So I can create 50 virtual machines, and maybe I'm really just taking up the space of 4 or 5. What's cool about this is Cubes allows me to create disposable VMs. So it grabs the latest version of Firefox, the latest version of my plugins, instantiates a virtual machine, lets me do some stuff, and destroys it when it's done. That virtual machine has very, very limited access to the core host, and if done right, it should not be possible to jump and read memory from other virtual machines. But this is what we're seeing with Meltdown and Spectre. There are attacks against the Intel management engine, which is why prior to installing Cubes, they encourage you to use something called Core Boot as an alternative for your traditional BIOS. So install Core Boot, get Cubes, you got your disposable VM, and at least at this point, I can browse the internet, I can visit websites, and should anybody ever attack me, it's inside of a virtual machine that should be destroyed. Are virtual machines good enough for security? No. You want physically separated hardware, and heck, you want stateless computing at that. But you don't always have the capability. If I've got one laptop, I've got 10 customers, I create app VMs for customers 1 through 10. All the data for all those customers is isolated in each virtual machine. Each virtual machine can be encrypted, can be backed up separately. Turn them on one at a time. Now what's pretty is that you've got your one interface that you run it all from. So right here, I've got an app VM, and I'm working on something in a firewall because everything's a web interface these days. Over here, I've got an app VM, and again, I'm using web application after web application after web application for the SIMs, for firewall management, for network management, for the ticketing system, for my emails to go back and forth with the customers. If I'm doing all this in one tab, after another, after another, after another, you know how dangerous that is? We're going to talk about cross-site request forgery, but you go do a search on Google for something that you're seeing in a different tab, you get hit with the browser bug, people will pivot from one tab to another. You're not supposed to be able to do this, but they will. So by isolating all of our virtual machines and using separate caching directories and isolating their ability to talk to one another, it's going to keep us much, much more secure. Can you do this on top of Windows, Linux, OS X with VMware? Sure. Just you want to lock down those virtual machines. You want to have VMware tools disabled. You don't want to have easy copy-paste going back and forth. Every single feature that you can disable, other than things that increase security, you want off, because VMware can be targeted just like anything else. So browser bugs are out there. People use 0 days en masse, even through advertising networks, hitting just spray and pray. The only real hope for this is isolated systems, or again, not quite as good, but virtualization. Our best approach to virtualization that I like is cubes. Piggyback software installations. One of the tools we talked about earlier, Offcrack, they said you can go get it at SourceForge. Has anybody had any bad experiences with SourceForge in the last year or two? I feel like they were a household name for almost a decade, and then I started getting these custom installers. Some of the guys that I used to kind of learn hacking from many, many years ago, this was an entire industry. You would do a search for VLC, and all they would do is a custom installer. They'd say, here's VLC plus a browser plugin. And it would be part of the same install. And they would buy the ad, or they would do search engine optimization to be the first click. So when users go to download something, yes, it's VLC. Yeah, sure, that's 7-zip. But it's a custom installer because it came from a third-party site. VLC is not the best example. A good example is a lot of our hacking tools. We might cover something in class and go, oh, where do I find that? If you don't have a reputable source, we've got no idea for what went into it. So browser add-ons, we know that this is no good. And then sometimes spyware, you can just set cookies or things called super cookies to be able to track people. We're going to see in the web app section how cookies are used for authentication, because you know how TCP is stateful, and yes, HTTP uses TCP, but web apps aren't stateful. Your sessions are always torn down. So cookies give us this idea of session, but these cookies can be stolen. They can be predicted. FileZilla is doing a bundle of software crap. Oh no. All these free tools, you're like, come on, it's been free for 20 years. You mean this guy needs to make money now? Kind of a bummer. So here's some kind of wacky tools, right? You've got Spy Agent, you've got Power Spy. They create utilities like this for making it really simple for non-technical users to monitor things. Look at the topics, things like computer, how long was somebody on the computer? What were the internet activities? Again, this is for like family computer control. As you go on though, you're gonna see there's other monitoring activities, much, much more nefarious, that can actually even run on mobile devices. Some of these spyware utilities are dedicated for audio, some of them are dedicated for video. Again, we are not the market for this. This is just to show you that it's really easy for regular people to get their hands on the tools. We'd probably use a custom agent through Metasploit. Metasploit will allow us to turn on audio, turn on video. You can even use APIs from Windows and Linux to go ahead and access these things. These third-party tools do have some benefits, however. If you're targeting somebody, I don't know, maybe it's an accountant, maybe it's a realtor, maybe it's not a really technical user. Maybe they're running antivirus. If my target is running antivirus, their antivirus may list some of the spyware utilities, things that you use especially for monitoring kids. You could use it to monitor an attorney. And their AV is not going to flag it sometimes. Again, you're going to have to do some research, figure out what AV they have, download a trial copy, load up the spyware, see if it throws an alert. Okay, it did. Can you set an exception to it easily? Again, just things to think about. The cornball, I guess you'd call them kind of third-party apps that look a little goofy. Again, the one thing that they lend themselves is sometimes a little bit of industry credibility because they don't want to throw off the AV. It's like, hey, this is a commercial tool. I'm not sure who's using it for what, but AV doesn't have to bark. Let's see. Adam says, will you share with us some reputable places to get the tools that we need to learn and use? Absolutely. Krista says, AdBlock forever. Right. AdBlock is good. Pi-hole is good. The place you get the labs from EC Council actually includes all the tools you can download. Great point, Maury. There's a repository from EC Council, and they actually have like zip files of all the tools. Now, did they get it from somebody good? Who knows? But enough people have been through their tools. I still wouldn't trust them totally. And when you download those tools, your AV is not going to be happy, right? They're kind of mutually exclusive, using antivirus and having all this hostile stuff around. But you can download the tools from EC Council. They're pretty good copies. Other than that, if you've got any tools that you're trying to find, let me know. The best thing, I think, for security recently was kind of GitHub. Because we had this repository, people were putting their names on things, they were kind of tying it to their resume, which is a little weird, you know? My favorite saying from DEF CON was get InfoSec out of hacking. They're like, what's all this stuff going on? What has it really done to the hacking industry? And you used to have people that would publish a tool, and you're like, who published this tool? And it was like Elite Lord 74. I'm like, I don't know who that is. Today, when somebody publishes a tool, it's like Michael Lawrence of HP Systems or HP Web Inspect division, and it's basically this dude's resume. So he's like, here I am, this is my code, I'm ready for comments. So the newer approach to getting a lot of these hacking tools is good. It's just when we look at an old classic unique tool that you can't find around, my best source for that would probably be EC Council's website. Because all the other guys that put repositories out there, I'm like, what's their motivation to host that archive for us? I'd like to think everybody's just great, but if it's an anonymous archive that's hosted somewhere, we've got to wonder what other stuff is in those tools. So yeah, AV can be good, can be bad. You can run it on some of your firewalls now. So GPS spyware, some of these are crazy. Does anybody mess with Mobile Spy or Flexi Spy? These are software packages for cell phones. Spyware is another good one. There's so much that you can do. If you have access to somebody's phone, sometimes it needs to be on an older version of code so that you can exploit it first. But again, we're running around with supercomputers in our laps, or pockets, multiple cameras, multiple microphones, noise canceling, and unfortunately, many times criminally insecure. All the kind of burner phones we saw at Black Hat and DEF CON, all of them had, tons and tons of vulnerabilities on them. So as far as defending against keyloggers, it's pretty tricky. It's just kind of good digital hygiene. We want to be careful about what we run. We want to be careful about what we install. I go back through my ad remove programs all the time, and I feel like I find stuff in there that I never installed. It's like, I don't know how this got on my box, so I'll purge it off. Or I'll have utilities I load once or twice for a project and don't use, get rid of them. Because if we're not updating them constantly like we should be, and if you're not running it, it's not auto-updating, attackers will find those old applications and use them for privilege escalation.